The first pasuk in the Torah, first verse begins, Bereshis bara Elokim. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Eisa Shamayim Eisa Oretz. Now we know the Hebrew alphabet is 22 letters. The first letter of the alphabet is Aleph. But yet the Torah begins with the letter Beis. You would think the Torah, if we're starting from the beginning, and the alphabet is the alphabet of the holy language, which is referred to as Lashon HaKodesh, the holy tongue. And the Ramban explains, why is Hebrew referred to as Lashon HaKodesh? It's the holy language because it's God's language. God created the world with Hebrew words. When we speak about Asar Ma'amoros, God, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says, God created 10 utterances. Those utterances were Hebrew. At Sinai, when he gave the 10 commandments to the Jewish people, and he spoke to us, what's the first of the 10 commandments? Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Asher Tzitzicha Meretz. I am God Almighty who took you out of Egypt. That's the first of the 10 commandments. What is the first commandment would start with? Then Aleph. Anochi Hashem Elokecha. And yet the Torah, which the objective of the Torah is only to spiritualize ourselves, to be worthy, to have a relation with God, the Torah, which is the fundamental, the base, and the foundation of everything, starts with the base. Why does it start with the base? That's the question. So over here, the Baal HaTurim offers a number of reasons that since the objective of existence is the fulfillment of the Torah, as it says, Rashi cites the Midrash, for the sake of Rashis, which is the ultimate, the choicest, the world was created. And what's the ultimate? The ultimate is the Torah. The Torah is comprised of two parts, the written law and you have the oral law. So therefore, it's two. It would have been one. Aleph means one. Beis is two. So what is the Torah comprised of? It's the written and God's commentary on what he said. During the Second Temple period, there was the sect, they were called Sadducees. Sadducees, they only accepted the authenticity of the written law. The oral interpretation said that was something contrived by the rabbis. They made it up. As long as the text is able to tolerate any interpretation, every interpretation is acceptable. God never gave a commentary on what he said. It's up for us. Whatever you're able to explain those words to me, that's what God wants we should do, which is not correct. It's contrary to what Jewish belief is. God gave the text, which is the written law, and the oral law is God's commentary on what he said, on what he meant. But that was the two sects. There were the Pharisees and there were Sadducees. The Prushim, they were the rabbis. They had the tradition from Sinai. It starts with Beis. Torah is comprised of two parts, written and oral. That's the Baal HaTurim over here in his commentary. However, the Midrash explains it differently. Beautiful Midrash. The Midrash starts, this is the first Midrash, Yalkut. It's a compilation of various Midrashim. The Midrash says,
you need vitamins?
Yeah. One vitamin.
Let's try to silence this. Okay.
Oh, I see.
It says, Hani Tisha, okay? There's a verse, it says, B'dvar Hashem shamayim nasu. Through the word of God, heaven was made. God said, let it be, and it became. Omer Rebbe Kiva, Elo esrim u'shnayim osir sheben nitno kol haTorah kula. What does it mean? Through the word of God, heaven was made. It's referring to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Bechakukim, be'eit shel heves al kesen nora shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's etched through a pen made of fire, which is engraved on the crown, the awesome crown of God. Ubeshoshe bikesh HaKadosh Baruch Hu liboras es ha'olam yardu v'amdu fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The 22 letters came before God, and each one said to God, create the world with the spirituality which exists within me. Zeomer lefarad bi tivras ha'olam. Each letter said, with the spirituality within the letter, this letter, you should create the world. Betchila nichnas tov. The letter tov came in, which is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Why? What the verse Torah tzivah to Moshe? The word Torah begins with the letter Tov. So you're going to give the Torah to the Jewish people through Moshe Rabbeinu. And what is the first word of that statement? Torah tzivah to Moshe. So if that's the case, the Torah should begin with the letter Tov. Of course, it says the Torah was commanded us by Moshe, which is the heritage of the congregation of Jacob. Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'amalav. Hashem says Tov is not acceptable. Why? Because at the time of the destruction of the temple, the letter Tov was written in red on the heads of all those that were going to perish during the destruction of the temple. So since the Tov represents death, the red letter Tov, therefore Tov is not acceptable. Torah should be with Tov. Miyad yotzul fornam pachi nefesh. The Tov was disappointed. The spirituality of the Tov was rejected. And every letter came and presented its case. Nichnas beis v'oma lefonech ribon shalom tzoncha shetivri b'yis olam. The letter Beis says to God, I think the world should be created with the spirituality which lies within letter Beis. Beis. Why? Why the letter Beis should be Omrim b'chol yom Baruch Hashem l'olam omein v'omein. Because the word Baruch, blessed, we say blessed is God forever, omein v'omein. That's why it should begin with the letter Beis. Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God says, hey, you're right, you're correct. I will create the world with the spiritual letter Beis. Baruch haba b'shem Hashem. Blessed is the one who came in the name of Hashem. Miyad kibla HaKadosh Baruch Hu baruch b'as olam b'beis. Immediately created the world with the spiritual letter Beis, and that's the first verse of the Torah. Bereshis bara Elokim. In the beginning, God created. Starts with a Beis, because what is the objective of creation? Baruch Hashem l'omein v'omein. Blessed is God forever, omein v'omein. What exactly is this all talking about? The Navi, the prophet says, what is the objective of creation? Why did God create this world? David says, King David Melch says in Tehillim, Olam chesed yibaneh. We've mentioned this many times, this verse in Tehillim. The world was created through the chesed, indiscriminate kindness of God. Now, why did he create existence? Because he wanted to create a setting to give the human being an opportunity that if he succeeds, he should be a beneficiary of the ultimate good, which is having a relation with God. But you have to recognize, L'chvodi barosiv, I've created this world for my glory. God needs no glory. God is perfect on the absolute level. So what do you mean I created for my glory? Meaning, if you want to have a relationship with me, if you recognize my glory and you address my glory, then you're worthy to have a relationship. If you don't address the glory and you turn your back on my glory, then we have no relationship. years ago, there was an article in the New York Times, and there's a world-renowned atheist who lived in San Francisco, and he was a Jew. And he was vehemently opposed to the existence of God. So somebody said to him, "You're a smart man. We know in life we hedge our bets. You always hedge." So he said to him, "What would be, as much as you believe there is no God, but why don't you take consideration that someday you're going to meet your maker and there may be a God. So why don't you live your life as if there is a God, even though you have this question? You should hedge your bets." That's the question they asked to this atheist who lived in San Francisco. So he said, "When I come before my maker, if there is a God, I'm going to say to him, why don't you tell me about it? Why did you keep it a secret?" That was his wise guy answer. That's what he answered. This was in the article. You understand? If a person lives his life and you had no interest in knowing God, all of a sudden, person passes away at whatever age, "God, I'd like to have a relationship." Doesn't happen. It's like a person, he passes you every day in the street, he behaves as if he doesn't know you. All of a sudden, he falls in hard times. He becomes your best friend because he needs a favor from you. He needs a loan. Person says to him, "I don't stand. When you didn't need me, you didn't even acknowledge me. Where the acknowledgement cost you nothing. Now that you need me and you want me, now you want to have a relationship? We have no relationship. Have a good day." The only way you could have a relationship with God if you acknowledge God throughout your life, despite all the reasons not to acknowledge Him. We have egos. We're self-centered. We have entitlements. We believe we have entitlements. Therefore, how do we behave? We write our own narrative of life. But you realize if you write your own narrative of life, that means you're going in the direction in which you're inclined, which is the physicality of life. God says, but that's not what it is. It's the challenge. Despite all those inclinations and overwhelming drives to go in the opposite direction, if you recognize my glory despite that, then we have a relationship. If you go through thick and thin for me, we have a relationship. And then you merit the ultimate. Now, what is that? The Talmud tells us, what is a blessing? What is a blessing? A bracha must contain Shem Malchus. It must contain the name of God and acknowledging God as the King of the universe. So when we say a bracha, we say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech olam. Blessed are you, God. Yudke Vavke means Master Infinite, Almighty of the world, King Almighty. That's the acknowledgement we make. When you say the blessing and you make that declaration of acknowledgement, then you're recognizing my glory. Then you're glorifying me. You're indicating and declaring the world is not your world. God is the King of the universe. God Almighty is the King of the universe, the Master. Who are we? We are your subjects. To be able to recognize, despite we have choice to go the opposite direction, and we acknowledge God with Shem Malchus, the name, and acknowledge Him as the King of the universe, that gives you merit. Because you fulfill the purpose of existence, of creation, is because you recognized that everything is my glory. There's a word which I once mentioned, name of Moshe Cordovero. He was known as the Ramak. It was an acronym for his name, Moshe Cordovero. Moshe Cordovero was a contemporary of the Arizal, lived the same time as the Arizal, the Ria Kodesh. And his grave is in the cemetery in Tzfas. His grave is right next to the Arizal. He was a very holy man. And he has a work, it's called Tomed Dvorah. It's called the Palm Tree of Dvorah. It's semi-Kabbalistic work, part of his really very intense Kabbalah. And he writes over there in Shachris, the first blessing of creation, when we say, Ma Rabu Masech Hashem, Kulam B'choch Bisa. Ma Rabu Masech, how great, or how literally means how numerous are your actions, God. You made them all with great wisdom. All creation, Ma Rabu Masech. So he says, that's not what it means. Rabu doesn't mean how great or how numerous. Doesn't mean numerous. It means every aspect of creation is so profound, it speaks and identifies who the creator was. How profound are your actions, Hashem? You made them all with chokhmah, with divine wisdom, meaning that we know that there are no two fingerprints which are identical. There are no two snowflakes which are identical. This is fact. Every aspect of creation has God, his fingerprint on it. It's the fingerprint of the creator, of the infinite divine being. How profound, wherever you look in the creation, whether it's heaven, whether you look at a molecule, you look at an atom, you look at a follicle of hair, whatever it is, it's profound. It cannot be denied that this is God's creation. That's my Rabu. That's how profound it is. But to see that, it's not so simple. You have to have a background to be able to see it. A person sees a Rembrandt. So if you have a background and educated and experience in masters, when you see that Rembrandt, you're amazed because you appreciate the strokes, the thickness of the paint, the quality of the paint, the colors, the contrast. You're amazed at it. Rembrandt's fingerprint, handprint is on that painting. This is Rembrandt. Can't be anybody else. There was only one Rembrandt. Lahavdil. When you look at creation, Ma'arabu Masecho, the profoundness of creation speaks, it's divine. It came through divine creation. A creator is a divine being. Only he is able to create such a creation. And that's the objective of life. To recognize, to say, Baruch Hashem l'olam omi v'omi. The Torah begins with Baruch Hashem. Blessed is God forever. Omi v'omi. To recognize that. Therefore, the Torah starts with the base, because that's the objective of creation. Now, the question is this. So let's bless God. What do we need the Torah for? You understand? A person is born with his eyes closed, and he needs surgery to open the eyes. And even if he opened the eyelids, there's a thick membrane on the eye itself. And it takes extensive surgery to remove all these various layers of membrane so the light should penetrate into the pupil to be able to see and to focus. It's known fact when a baby is born, a baby brain is not sufficiently developed. All it sees is light, colors. It cannot visualize images yet. By maybe the 6th week, it starts seeing images and has some degree of recognition. Because the brain is not sufficiently developed that the eye should be able to see. So it takes time, it needs development. A human being a composite of physical and spiritual, we need orientation. We need a rigorous level of involvement to be able to sense God's glory in existence. How do you do that? It's called the spiritualization process. First of all, you must believe in God. You must love God. You must revere God. You must observe the positive commandments. You're not permitted to transgress the negative commandments. There's a whole regiment, a whole prescription of life that you have to live by, which is God's narrative. And then all of a sudden, you start sensing things. And you're committed to that narrative, to that prescription of life. Now, when we speak of blessing, say, blessed art thou, God, Master, Almighty, King of the universe. Somebody says, what are you talking about? Who's the King of the universe? No? Lahavdin. United States, the mightiest country in the world, the president, the this. What are you talking about? Who's this Almighty? Almighty. Who's Almighty? If you observe the positive, negative commandments, all of a sudden you have a sense that there's no Almighty. When a person, God forbid, is deathly ill and the doctor says to the patient, we can't help you. The only one who can help you is God. All of a sudden, God comes into the person's life. It was never part of a person's life. And the doctors who were the experts and said, we can't help you any longer. All of a sudden, the person opens his eyes and he sees a new entity, a new phase in his life has entered into his life. It's called prayer. Never prayed before. I was once flying to Israel many years ago, and I'm sitting next to a person, an Israeli, and he lived in Philadelphia at the time. He was single, not married, must have been maybe 30, and he worked for the Jewish agency. In Hebrew, it's called the Sochnut. And I see he's really sulking. And I said to him, is everything okay? He says he's going back to Israel. His father's dying of cancer, and he wants to see his father before he dies. And he tells him about his position in Philadelphia, encourage the youth to emigrate to Israel, and so on and so forth. So I said to him, do you believe in God? He says, no. Doesn't believe in God. So he says to me, he says, I have a brother who's a Baal Tshuva, that my father's so anti-religious that he told my brother, who's observant, that when he dies, he doesn't want him to say Kaddish for him. He doesn't want, on any circumstance, he should acknowledge that he was a son, because he came observant. That's how anti-religious he was. And I said, what's your position? He says he has the same position. Anti-religious, okay. So he's sitting there. All of a sudden, I see him. He's talking to himself. He's mumbling. So I said, what are you doing? He says, I'm praying. I said, you're praying? You just finished telling me now, about half an hour ago, that you don't believe in God. Who are you praying to? So he says to me in Hebrew, Zeh lo fair. That comment is not a fair comment. That's the way they speak Hebrew. Zeh lo fair. It's not fair. What my comment is not an appropriate comment. If that's like an under the belt comment. Because here he said he doesn't believe in God, but all of a sudden now in his sorrow, in his pain, he's turning to God. So I asked him, what are you turning to God? You don't believe in God. He says, it's not fair. Your question is not a fair question. You understand? Sometimes you need that pain to realize. Some person has to have a headache to realize he has a head on his shoulders. Otherwise, he doesn't even realize he has a head on his shoulders. A person sometimes has to have a reversal financially to appreciate what it meant when he had the money. Because he had no appreciation. When you don't have, then you start appreciating what you do have. You need the Torah. You need that orientation of mitzvahs, positive, negative commandments, to activate all your spiritual senses, to appreciate what's ma Rabbu Masecha Hashem Kulam B'Chok Mesiso. How profound are your actions? I remember when I was a child, I went to yeshiva on the Lower East Side, so these take us to the Hayden Planetarium. I must have been about 11 years old. They take the class to the Hayden Planetarium. I was sitting there in this dark room, and also the lights go out, and you see things on the ceiling with lights, and they tell everybody to lift up their heads and look at the ceiling. I've never experienced anything so boring as the Hayden Planetarium. The galaxies, the formation, the stars, the this and that. If I would have had an appreciation what it was, maybe I would have had an interest. The first time I've ever been exposed to anything like this, 11-year-old child, all of a sudden they tell you to look up at the ceiling, and you have to sit there for an hour. Thank God I was young enough I didn't walk out of there with a stiff neck. That's what it was. Lahavdil, a human being, is a physical being. Every aspect of our emotion, feeling, is inclined to physicality. How do you somehow put the brakes on that physicality? How do you turn the rudder to go in another direction? Where do you get that strength? You have to have superhuman strength to move that rudder. You're going against the current. But if you empower it with spirituality, which are positive, negative commandments, all of a sudden you have a certain understanding exactly how to move that rudder, despite the force of the current, which is going the opposite direction. You can move that rudder because God gives you that insight and that ability to move the rudder. And all of a sudden you're soaring and you're going in the right direction because you've been spiritualized. Now that all of a sudden you start seeing things you never saw before. You see the profoundness of God's creation. And all of a sudden you say, blessed is God, the master, the king of the universe, the Almighty. Until now, you never say why. He says, something, because I never saw it before. But now that I'm involved in the process of advancement, now I have an appreciation. It's Baruch Hashem lo omein v'omein. Therefore, the Torah starts with Beis. Beis, because the Torah itself, which is God's wisdom, which is how the Jew has to live. And how did we become the holy nation, the princely, kingly nation? Because we accepted Torah at Sinai. But that's essential to be able to have that appreciation for whatever that is, to be able to read the terrain. If you ever read about the Mossad, to be qualified to join the Mossad in Israel, when they walk down the street, the training is, first they have to have a certain IQ to be able to be qualified to join. When they walk down the street, they see things and notice things that the average person just walks by, glosses over, with people around them, profiling people, things in the street, something on the ground. They don't miss a thing. That the training of the eye and the mind and focus is, they're literally like a minesweeper. They gather all this information and they process it immediately. What's essential, what they reject. That's what it's all about. But you know what level of training they need to be able to have that ability? To see it as they should see it. A Jew needs a tremendous amount of orientation and training, intellectual training, actualization and action. The positive, negative commandments. Don't get waylaid. Don't get off track. Then we talk about the world now we could address its objective. I've created this world for my glory. And once you meet that objective, then you merit the relationship. And then you have a share in the world to come. Because then you recognize God. You lived your life for God. Because you had that orientation. And it's worth it all. Because there's nothing as profound as the payback, the return on that investment. Therefore, it starts with Beis. So Hashem says, the olive standing by the wayside. So Hashem says to the olive, why don't you ask to be that we should be created with the olive? So the Beis was chosen, but the olive never came to ask to be created. He said, why? Because every letter in the Hebrew alphabet represents more than one. It's multiples. 2, Beis is 2, it's 1 and 1. I'm a single. Therefore, I'm only one. What's my value? He says, something? What you just displayed is a tremendous level of humility. And you know something? You're one and I'm one, God says. The first of the 10 commandments is Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am God, you are Almighty. So he took you out of Egypt. Therefore, the first of the 10 commandments starts with the letter Aleph. Because you display this humility. And you're one, you're not multiples. I'm also one, I'm not multiples. Therefore, to demonstrate and express that reality, the first of the Aser Sedibros, 10 commandments is Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Therefore, it starts with the letter Aleph for that reason.
Okay. All right. I'll call back. Thank you so much for your help. Have a good night.
One second. There's a verse, there's a pasuk in Nishlei, in Proverbs, where Shlomo Melech says, Hashem b'chochma yoser oretz. God founded the world with wisdom. Uchshebora kodesh baruch hu es olamo nisiyayitz b'torah u'borsa olam. When God created the world, he consulted with the Torah, and then he created the world. What does it mean he consulted with the Torah? Now, there used to be a person, Yad Avram, his name was Ian Bader. I'm not sure if Norman remembers him. Ian and Lynn Bader, they're both South Africans. There was an architectural firm, it still exists, it's called IMP, one of the top architectural firms in the world. And he is a partner in that firm when he was a young man. And let's say they would draw up a blueprint to build whatever they build throughout the world. They were the architects, many of very significant projects in the world. Now, when the contractor is given the project to build, what does he build it off? He builds it off the blueprint. The architect designs that special ingenious blueprint, especially comes from that kind of firm. And the contractor gets the people, the subcontractors, to be able to address and read that blueprint as it was written. So everything is built off the blueprint. What is the blueprint of existence? The blueprint of existence is the Torah itself. I mean, if the objective of creation is to live by the narrative of the Torah, that means everything in existence has to have some relevance to be able to fulfill the Torah. If you need that orientation to observe dietary laws, that means you have to have kosher species. And you have to have the process to bring about even the kosher species that they should be considered kosher. You need ritual slaughter. Yeah, blood, the blood has to be extracted with salt or with fire. You have to have wool and linen because there's a negative commandment. The Jew is not permitted to wear a combination of wool and linen. It's called shatnez. Many things. So what is the blueprint of existence? God consulted with the Torah to create the world. That's Hashem b'chokhmah yosed oretz. God through the wisdom. What's the ultimate? God's divine wisdom is the Torah. Through that, he founded existence. Existence came about as a result of the blueprint, which is the Torah itself. Shenemar li eitza v'tushia ani bina li gvura. Okay, it's a phenomenal midrash. Lefichoch David bekalis omer. David is extolling the Torah. David was the most special king of the Jewish people. That's the Davidic line. Ultimately, Mashiach ben David. David in the Kabbalistic works is considered the fourth leg of the holy throne of God. You have the three patriarchs, and the fourth leg is David. Of the Kisei HaKavod, of the throne of God. And he writes in Tehillim, Rechova mitzvos chamod. Your mitzvah is very broad and wide. V'omer. And there's another verse, Arucha me'eretz midah. Its measure is more lengthy than the world, than the earth. And that is literally the nursemaid of creation, meaning that's the source of creation. And through that, he created heaven and earth. Now, this is the point. The prophet Jeremiah says, if not for my covenant being in effect day and night, the world would not exist. What is my covenant? The study of Torah. Since the study of Torah has to be an ongoing engagement, therefore the world itself has an ongoing existence day and night. That itself is the expression of the blueprint. That's the actualization of the blueprint. So based on quoting all these verses from prophets, the Midrash is Halamarata. So what do we learn from all this? The foundation of all existence is the Torah itself. That's the blueprint. And God gave this Torah, which is the blueprint of existence, We should engage in it. And its mitzvos, its commandments, day and night. Shenemar, as it says, there's a verse in Joshua. We just read it on Simchas Torah in the Haftorah. You should meditate, engage in my Torah day and night. Shomrei Torah Olam Omed. Why does the Torah exist? It exists only because those who observe the Torah. The world, if there would not be Jews observing the Torah, the world would not exist. The Chavetz Chaim explains this with a phenomenal allegory. Phenomenal. There was this king, he commissioned a shipbuilder to build for him a steamboat. Meaning it's propelled by steam, and you have paddles in the back of the boat. So you have in the bows of the boat, you have turbines that produces steam, and the boat just glides over the water. You're not dependent on the wind with sails. And he commissioned the boat. It should be a replica of his palace. That if you walk on this boat, you believe you're in your palace. The amenities, the furnishings, identical. When the boat was finished, the king was invited to come to see what it was and to have the maiden voyage on this boat, on the ship. He gets on the ship, he walks in. He's breathless. Everything is exact like his palace, on a smaller scale. And the captain, dressed in his finest, greets the king, brings him into the throne room, and he has that large window that he can look out at the river, and this boat is just gliding over the water. The king's amazed. He's never felt so happy. And the king says to the captain, I really want to understand how this boat operates. How does it work? What generates the momentum that allows it to glide over the water? Why do those paddles turn? He says, could you show me? The captain says, I don't think it's appropriate. If you go down to the bowels of the ship, because there's coal, which feeds these ovens, which causes the water to boil, which gets these turbines to turn, which causes the paddles to turn. There's so much coal dust there. The walls are coated with soot. The temperature is at a level, the men working there, they're working without shirts and their bare skin. And they're actually red from the heat of the fire. And they're covered from head to toe with coal dust. They look like they're black. The walls are black. King said, I'd like to see it. Like to see it. So the captain tries to discourage the king, goes down there with his regal garments, and he sees it, and he becomes livid. Can't control his temper. He says, this is a disgrace. The palace of the king should have such uncleanliness, such filth. It's intolerable. So he tells the captain, I give an order. You have to break out the walls of the ship. It has to be cleansed. You got to break the walls out. The captain pleads with the king in his fit of anger. He says, we break out the walls. You know what happens? The ship goes down. King says, I don't care. Just break out the walls. What do? You break the walls, ship sinks. With the captain and everything. You walk into a study hall. You see this little Jew, emaciated, hasn't bought a new suit in 16 years. Humble, meek, fully engaged in Torah study. And this rich man comes in with his Brioni suit and his Feodora and his cologne and his pinky ring with this Rolls Royce parked outside. And he looks at this pitiful Jew. And he says, look at this pitiful Jew. He's not worth the salt of the bread that he eats. But little does he know that this little Jew who studies Torah day and night, all existence exists because of him. So what he's minimizing, that little Jew, The whole world stands on his shoulders. It's in the merit of those who study Torah and do the mitzvahs. That's why this world stands. It's not the movers and the shakers. It's not the powers of existence. This is the power. This generates the power. This is the powerhouse. But how could it be? Because the Creator created the world with one objective. The objective is for my glory. And only through what he does, that addresses my glory. And he appreciates my glory. When you get into your Rolls Royce and go out to your country club, and each kosher style at whatever Romanian on the Lower East Side, you got it, the goulash. You may think you're eating kosher, but you're eating whatever else you're eating. Or what, the deli on 2nd Avenue Deli there, whatever it was called. You know, you may think you're doing this. You may think you're king of the hilt. But you know something? Without that special devout Jew who's invested his life in God's glory, this world would not exist. Because it only exists because for God's glory. And if there is no glory, there's no world. And that's exactly what the Medrash is saying. Shomrei Torah Olam Omed. Only because of those who observe the Torah does the world stand. Shekain Omer Chana. Chana was the mother of Samuel the prophet. She says, Ki Lashem Mitzuke Eretz. For God, they are the pillars. Those who dedicate, they are the pillars of existence. Umi Mitzuke Eretz. And who are those pillars? Elishomei Torah, Shebesuscham, Husa Torah. It's those who observe the Torah, because in their merit, that's why the Torah originally was given. Because they will be those kinds of Jews who are going to be committed to the Torah itself. And it continues going. There's a verse in Mishlei where King Solomon says, Ekev Hanova Yiras Hashem. The heel of humility is Yiras Hashem. If a person reveres God, fears God, then you have humility. The Kisra Yiro. The crown of a Jew is his what? Is his reverence of God. That's your crown you wear. If you revere God, that's your crown. Now, it's interesting. We wear tefillin on our arm and we wear tefillin on our head. Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jewish people, when the nations of the world will see the name of God upon you, they will revere you. They will fear you. And the Gemara explains, Rabbi Elazar ben Hurkana says, what is the Shem Hashem? What is the name of God is called upon you? Tefillin Shebarosh. It's tefillin we are on our head, which has the majority of the name of Hashem, Shakai. When they see that on your head, they will revere you. That is the crown of the Jew. That's the crown. The crown of the Jew is demonstrating and expressing his reverence of God. When the non-Jew sees you representing the reverence of God, he will have reverence for you, because you are God's representative in this existence. You're not just an ordinary mortal. I have to go back to the story I always tell over. Jimmy Walker was the mayor of New York in the 1920s. He was the head of the political machine called Tammany Hall. It was corrupt. They were gangsters. And when he met Reb Baruch Ber, Leibowitz, Zeichat Tzadik Levrocha of the Kamentzor Yeshiva, when he came to the United States in 1926 to raise money for Kamenetz, his yeshiva in Europe, when this Jimmy Walker sees him, he says, you have to accept the honor of becoming the citizen of New York, and I will give you the key to the city. And they put bleachers and grandstands in City Hall. And who sat on the dais? This rabbi. He looked like a person, you go back to the 1500s. Long black coat, beard, a hat, round hat, and he's sitting there. And Jimmy Walker gets up to speak. He says to the crowd, this man is a refutation of the Darwinian theory. Nobody could say ever that this man descends from the ape. This man is the creation of God himself. You can see the holiness emanating from him. You understand? Because every aspect of his being was fully invested in the Torah itself. So when he wore that tefillin on his head, it's so what's the crown of the Jew? The crown of the Jew is Ekev Anovo, Yiras Hashem. The foundation is humility. But if you have that level of humility, which crown do you carry? Who am I? What am I? God is everything. So the crown that you display is Yiras Hashem, is reverence for God. And that's what he said. When he saw this holy rabbi, he says, there's no way he descends from the ape. There's a famous story, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, Zecher Tzaddik Livrocha, who was one of the leading Torah sages 35 years ago in the United States, 40 years ago. He was the first cousin of my Rosh Hashiva, and he was the upper echelon of Torah sages in the world at the time. And he lived till the age of 95, and he was flying to Israel with his grandchildren. So he must have been maybe 90, and his grandchildren, the husband and wife, they were traveling with him. And during the flight, 10-hour flight, 12-hour flight, they were continuously engaged with the rabbi. And he was old enough to be more than their grandfather. He could have been their great-grandfather, because he had many grandchildren. And there was a secular Jew on the plane. He goes over to the rabbi, he says, I don't understand. Your grandchildren are so dedicated to you, they don't cease speaking to you. They're always wanting to call wisdom from you. My grandchildren, there's a generation, I can't speak to them. They have no interest in talking to me. Why do your children have such an interest talking to you, and mine don't have talking to me? So he says to them, I want to explain the difference between me and you. He says, we believe it all began at Sinai. I am closer to Sinai than they are, and they understand that. Therefore, because I'm more closely connected to the source, they want to cull as much wisdom from me as they can. You believe you come from the ape. The further we get away from the ape, the more we're developed as human beings. So what do you have to offer? They're closer to what the human being is than you are, because you're closer to the ape. That's what the rabbi explained to the secular Jew. You got it. Jimmy Walker, the gangster, he recognized in the holy rabbi, what is the crown of the Jew? Yiras Hashem, the fear of God. But what is the foundation of that? That's humility. He had the humility, and therefore he displayed this holiness, this reverence of God. And even this person couldn't deny that's what he was. And therefore he said he himself is a refutation on the Darwinian theory.